And one thing you should check, which I have checked before I started this project, is that the edge here is actually straight. I'm going to create a good enough for government work line. And I could actually measure using this. Let's see how that goes. I'm overthinking it right now. So you get to see what happens when someone overthinks. Which one is the, yeah, there it goes. I was looking for the grommet. The grommet's the top. So let's see. I may decide to actually keep the extra fabric instead because it would make cool little flags. That's another thought process entirely. So if I were to flip it over like that, do that. What did I just do? I did something silly. There we go. Whee! Okay. If you're making shorter flags, it's a lot easier. Note to the editor. Edit this flag. Anyway. Yeah. Okay. I know what's happened. The fabric stretched. Of course it has. If you've been hanging on a pole for years and years, you'd stretch too. All right. Okay. Starting over, I'm going to lay this like that. And that gives me plenty of stuff for the sleeve to go on the pole. And then I am going to simply draw a line on an angle up like that. This is one of those situations where you might use a woodworking tool in your craft room. Because what you could use is you could use a chalk line that you would use for marking on wood to do this, and it would work just fine. Because the chalk's going to come off anyway. I'm just eyeballing it literally. Literally eyeballing it. Doesn't have to be straight. All I'm trying to have is something to work with when I go to cut it. Oops. You'll notice everything's sliding around. I'm not worrying about it. Like I say, no one's going to get up there with a ruler on top of a 10-foot pole. If you have a longer table, it'd be handy. I could drag in a portable table for this. Unfortunately, most of my portable tables are currently in use by another member of our household or by me. And since the cat and dog don't use them, you know it's either me or Henry. So I'm just going to keep going. And if I were to find out somehow that I had like run out of room at this end, it's not a problem. I can just erase the chalk. The chalk literally flaps off. Good enough. There we go. I have a little extra at this end. Not going to worry about it. Okay, and then I'm going to take my sharp scissors and cut it. She says, "What you doing, Mom?" Whoops. This is a disadvantage to slippery fabric on a freshly polished table. However, if it was not freshly polished, it would be freshly dusty, because we've been super windy lately and super hot and dry, and every time I turn around there's another brush fire somewhere. So yeah, there's a lot of smoke dust and dust and pollen in the air. So I'm going to use a seam roller, and I'm going to roll this seam here and sew it into a tube. Now this I might do actually by hand. I have automatic tools. Sometimes I tend to do it by hand because I've just done it so much. I don't see any reason to fuss around. I am going to verify the width of the tube that I made last time, because it worked perfectly, and perfectly would be nice again this time. So I need to have enough to go around the pole, plus allow me to roll the edge. And I'm rolling the edge because most fabrics will fray, and silk essence will fray. If you would look at the edge, you would see the cut edge that came from the store has frayed a little. I'm not worried about that. Rolling it under like that solves that problem completely. And one thing you should check, which I have checked before I started this project, is that the edge here is actually straight. Sometimes when you get a piece of cut fabric, you're wondering what the person at the store was consuming when you were getting your fabric cut, because it doesn't even come close to straight. Okay, that's a smidge bigger than this one, so that's fine. So I'm going to get out my machine, and I'm going to roll this and create a casing for the pole to go in, and then I'm going to bind the edges, and I'll come back and talk to you about that in a couple of minutes. I have my casing all pinned. Now, if I were doing linen, I would not have pinned this, to be honest. But because this fabric is incredibly annoyingly slippery, I decided I would pin it. I want to make sure I got it right. I measured this end first, based on the piece I had before. If I hadn't had a piece before, I would have simply taken the fabric and wrapped it around whatever I was going to use as a pole, and then probably given another ½ inch to an inch at least beyond what I needed for the seams. You don't want to make it so tight that you're squishing it on there, or so that you have to redo it. That's just no fun. So what I did was I measured this end, and then all I did to make sure that I had gotten my stuff pretty even all the way down was do this. I just literally eyeballed it, and there we are. Now I've wound my bobbin, I've got my thread on. This is my ancient sewing machine that was purchased when my now in her 40s daughter was 18 months old, and it still works. I have taken very good care of it, and I have had it serviced on a regular basis. So let's see if we can make this work. I have a dog who's running up and down the house because my husband is running in and out of the building because he's working on something else. You'll notice that I have my foot pedal up on this table instead of on the floor. The reason I have that is because I know from experience that animals will sometimes think that this cord is delicious. I had a cat many years ago who liked to chew on it. So Rufus got very excited when I moved the stuff in here, and I immediately put everything up on the table. I know better than to leave it down because, like I say, apparently it's delicious to some critters. So I am now going to simply sew this. Now, if I was concerned about my ability to put in a grommet, that now would be the time. So if I was going to be doing something complicated, if I was going to be doing an eyelet using this, because this machine will make eyelets as well as buttonholes, you could make a plain old buttonhole that's just a small one to put your screw through. Do you have to use a screw? Well, no, but how are you going to keep the flag from sliding down the pole? So if you have some other means of doing it, fine. I did not want to staple it on. I did not want to, you know, put a nail in it. I wanted a screw because a screw was removable. So if I was concerned about that, I would put the grommet in now before I sewed it. But I'm not concerned about it. So I'm simply going to anchor the beginning of my, let's see, I need to make sure I'm going straight. Yep. It's been a while since I've used this. I had to think about it for a minute. I'm like, how does one do that? There we go. Anchor this. This is not an automatic in terms of like a lot of the newer ones now. They do everything but brush your teeth for you. This one you have to actually tell it what to do. But, you know, I can deal with that. So I'm going to sew this guy. And when I get done with that, I'll bring you back and I'll show you what I'm going to do next. Casing is done. Nice and tidy. The edge of the fabric is rolled, held in place by the seam. And now it is time to roll the edges. Now, this edge here is a selvage edge. I don't technically need to roll it, but I'm going to anyway, because these things take a huge amount of abuse from the wind, and it'll do two things. It will strengthen the edge, and it will make it just a tiny bit stiffer, which in the case of Silk Essence is not a bad plant because it's really, I don't want to say it's flimsy, but it's really flowy. So I actually want to make it a tiny stiffer. I am going to use a seam roller here as my means for doing this, because I have no urge to do this the hard way, which would be by hand. So I'm going to get it all set so that it's rolling the stuff in. And if your machine has a seam roller or an edge roller available, buy it. When I purchased this machine, let's see, my daughter was 18 months old. That would have been 1981. 1981? Yeah. No, 1982. This was not the top of the line, I don't think. I think it was one below the top of the line. But I have sewn probably hundreds and, if not thousands of yards of fabric on this. I've done drapes, I've done banners, I've done clothes for both of the kids, I've done clothes for myself and my husband. Most of the medieval clothes that I've made have been sewed on this. You know, so it has more than paid for itself. I did not at the time want to go for the most cutting, bleeding edge electronic machine. If I had to do over again, I don't think I would, because the reality is I don't use machine embroidery very often. This has the capacity for some machine embroidery work. It can do some pretty cool stuff, but I don't use it. And when I was doing like little girl dresses and stuff like that with frilly bits and stuff, even then I was more likely to do it by hand than I was to do it by machine. I would do some of the fancy plackets and stuff once in a while, but you have to make a decision based on what you are going to use. 99% of the time, I use a straight stitch or a narrow zigzag to do my work. And in the case of binding the edge here, I'm actually going to do a narrow zigzag because it works really well. You need to decide what you're going to use it for and make your decision based on that. There are people I know out there who use it all the time because they're doing all kinds of fiddly bits on either clothing or towels or quilting. But don't let them convince you that you need like every bell and whistle on the planet in order to be happy with your sewing machine. Be honest with yourself about what you're actually going to use and go with it. Believe yourself. So I'm just going to roll this now. I'm not going to go for major amounts of precision. All I'm trying to do is make sure there's a bit of reinforcement at the edge, basically. So as I was working, I was trying to think of other things that I could give as hints to people who've never done anything like this before. And one of the things that came to mind when it came time to cut the second flag was use the leftovers from the first flag to help you create the second flag. And that way, you have an exact copy. So I've got the first flag done. There we go. Woo! Is it perfect? No, but it's got a little bit of ruffle to the edge. But I'll tell you what, it's going to look great. And having that ruffle to the edge on the one edge actually will probably make it fly a little bit better. It's going to be bright and cheerful, and yeah, it's already screwed back on there and everything else. I can use the scrap left over from this, because the fabric's the same length, to create the second flag so that I know they'll be identical. That may not be important for some uses. In my case, I do want them to be pretty close. The other things that came to mind were when you go to put the grommet in, what I do is put the nice side of the grommet facing out of the towards the world and the screw. It just looks nicer. I don't think it'll have any difference in terms of longevity. And I do put a piece of, I have a piece of heavy linen. You could use cotton, canvas. You could use anything that's got more beef to it. The problem with something as lightweight and fluffy as this stuff is it doesn't have a lot of structural stability. So putting something else in that sandwich that you're making with the grommet is a great idea. When you're sewing the edges, be sure to hold them snugly. You're going to have to put one hand behind the sewing machine needle and one in front and hold it not overly tight, but pretty snug. Otherwise, something this lightweight is just going to crumple up. If you do that on this edge, which is not the selvage edge, it's the cut on the bias edge, it is going to create a slight ruffle, but that's a personal preference. I actually like the ruffle because I think it makes it hang kind of cool. But if you don't want that, be careful how much you stretch it. I have known of people who've actually put in a cord on that edge or a piece of like buttonhole thread or something, so that it's got a little bit of stabilizing capability to keep you from stretching that. I wasn't worried about that. On smaller pieces, like say if I was only making a flag that big instead of this big, it probably won't make any difference. But on this one, you will see the ruffle. I think it looks fine, so I'm not worried about it. So, back to cutting and sewing. I have one more to do, then I'm all done. And they're done. Now, the reason this pole looks longer is it's got a sleeve on the bottom of it right now, but the poles are actually the same length, the flags are actually the same length, and they're done. And this is going to be awesome. I hope this inspires you to try making a flag of your own. You see lots of people who'll put up, cute little flags and banners and stuff like that in their gardens, their front yards. It can be so much fun to have this kind of stuff around, and sometimes you just can't get exactly what you'd like to have. I haven't seen a banner or anything that inspired me in a while. I would, if I were making something, I'd find a cute little pattern of a gnome or something, and I'd be making myself a flag or a banner that had a gnome on it. Because wouldn't that just be cute, and it'd be yours, and you wouldn't look like everybody else who'd been to the big box store. So whether you need a small flag, a big flag, yeah, I got 2 big flags, and I am psyched. This is going to look great out in front of the shop, and it's another thing off my list. So I hope you found this inspiring or useful, or something. Some little hint that I gave you about how you could attach things correctly, or bind things correctly, or cut things correctly. Hope it helps. So until next time, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because obviously, going to be doing lots of stuff. So until next time, bye. Oh, and keep on brainstorming, because obviously I am. I'm going to go check my list and see what else I need to get done today. Bye.